Welcome to the Aperture PhotoBook Club. If you're tuning in from Johannesburg or the United States or anywhere in between, let us know in the chat where you are. We are always curious and interested to hear where you're tuning in from. Anyway, yes, it's always nice to see where people, and also, nice to see familiar names. Wow. Portugal, Oregon, Canada, New York, Baltimore, Chicago. I love it. So this is our final episode, if we want to call it an episode, final gathering of the Aperture PhotoBook Club for 2022, our inaugural year. Oh my gosh, Nepal. Okay, anyway, we're really thrilled you all are here. Thank you for joining. Today we are going to be talking about Aperture's reissue of House of Bondage. I can't wait to dive in, but let's first begin by introducing my fellow participants. I'm going to begin with Leslie Matlaisane, who is having their widespread power outages in Johannesburg. So this may be very difficult. And if so, we're going to figure out something post-production to bring Leslie's perspective in. But Leslie, can you hear us?
Yes, hi. My name is Leslie Matlaisane. I'm the nephew of Ernest Cole. I'm also the trustee of the Ernest Cole Family Trust. And I'm glad and very happy to be part of this event. Thank you.
We feel the same way, Leslie. Thank you for making the effort during this definitely very difficult time for you and everyone in Johannesburg. Oliver?
Hi, my name is Oliver Barstow. I was fortunate enough to be the graphic designer on this project. So I was the book designer for the re-release of the book, and also equally very happy to be having this conversation.
Well, we're thrilled you're here. So because we are bringing in all of these different cities, both from our participants and from all of you around the world joining us, we thought it would be great to begin with a little book tour that Denise has offered to prepare. While you're watching the book tour, and really at any time throughout tonight's program, wherever you are, please feel free to use the Q&A to ask questions of any one of us, and we will work them into our conversation throughout the next hour. So the chat is a great place to throw in, where you're tuning in from. And, oh, I see one special person who just joined. Denise, do you see who I see who just joined?
Yes. Yeah.
You want to, I'll let you acknowledge.
Oh, we just want to give a shout out to Judy Mason, who's the daughter of Jerry Mason, who is the publisher of the original edition. So I know some of the Masons are tuning in today.
That's really special. We're glad that you all are here. So yes, you'll have to ask particularly challenging questions. Denise can answer anything about the history of the book. So the chat is great to tell us where you're tuning in from. The Q&A function is wonderful if you have questions that you'd like to ask of any of today's participants, and we'll be weaving those into the conversation. With that, without further ado, Denise, tell us about this marvelous thing that we'll be discussing.
We're looking at the 1967 original edition of House of Bondage, and we'll be talking about it in more depth, hopefully in our conversation. And I know today, as we're talking about this book and this work in terms of design and decisions that were made around the book, that can often have a distancing effect. But my hope is that it never gets too far away from the power of these images and the magnitude of this book and this work. And that certainly was never far away from us as we were making these decisions. Ernest Cole is a Black South African photographer, and he just systematically photographed what life was like under apartheid, the kind of daily indignities and everyday atrocities that happened for the Black majority, just going through their life under apartheid. And he was really intentional about photographing all the different aspects with the idea that it would become a book. In 1966, he fled South Africa and was able to do so with his negatives and pictures. He was connected with Magnum, who connected him with Jerry Mason, who was the publisher of Ridge Press, who incidentally had published The Family of Man. And from there, this book was produced for Random House and published in 1967. Almost immediately, it became an extremely important book. It was the first in-depth look at what life was like under apartheid, and was incredibly shocking for people outside of South Africa to see this kind of take on it. I meant to say also that these photographs were taken often at great personal risk as well. So when this came out, it was almost instantly famous and impactful. And what you're looking at is the original cover and the end paper of the original edition. This is just a little bit of a kind of snapshot view of what that looked like. It included 18 different chapters. I did say it was extremely extensive and complex. Along with each chapter, first-person writings by Ernest Cole describing in depth what is happening and giving a history of what we're seeing. So this already became a kind of icon in book history, but also photo book history. And it's a book that I think a lot of people have heard about, but very few people have actually seen. So when we had the opportunity to reissue this in a new edition, we jumped at that. And I think I went in thinking it might be a simple task, but what I discovered was that it's actually really difficult to work with an icon and try to make something new. What you're looking at is the cover of our edition. It was important for us to work with someone who both understood the work and understood its place in photo history. And so that's why we hired and reached out to Oliver Barstow, who's on the line today, who's South African designer, and also had worked, was a publisher with Fourth Wall Books. And so we knew was very versed in the history of photo books. On our book, we've taken the positive of those printer's blocks of the original edition and kind of stamped that in, removed the flag and changed the picture behind it. And then on our end papers, which are here on the right, we've used the contact sheet of that image that was on the original end paper. And you can see there's a faint kind of blue X, that's Cole's handwriting on that contact sheet. This is just a bit of a tour of our book. We added new texts to just give this a new introduction for contemporary readers. What you're looking at is a lament that we commissioned by Mangani Wale Sorote, who's the poet laureate of South Africa, to really question, like, why look at this again now and bring this kind of piece of history into the present. We also commissioned a piece about the legacy of this book, which was written by Remy Anabanjo, and a piece about the life of Ernest Cole written by James Sanders. To signal that you're entering the original edition, so where we kept Cole's writing and layout intact, we use the end paper of the original. So it's just a very subtle way to know that you're entering the world of the original edition. And we've kept that exactly the same. So it's the same layout, it's the same text. If there was a typo in the text, we left that. What we're looking at is the Mines chapter, which opens House of Bondage and is the longest and probably one of the more devastating chapters. It was also really important for Cole, who wasn't able to publish this work in depth while in South Africa doing magazine work. So to present it in such depth in this book, where he's really showing the kind of conditions that the miners are working under, was important. I'm not going to show every picture in the book, but just enough so you get a sense of the work and the layout. You often see people who, it's very clear they're not content with their surroundings. There's a form of resistance in their eyes, and that was something that Cole was very specific about capturing. And this is just from the chapter Education. And I think you can get a sense that he was really thinking about where do I stand and what do I need to capture to present this work as evidence to the world of what was happening under apartheid. You also get a sense of affection. He really cares about the people he's portraying. And again, this is just a short book tour. The book ends on a chapter on banishment, which of course he must have known was going to foretell that he would live in exile after this book was published. Almost as soon as it came out, it was banned in South Africa, and he could no longer go home. This is the image that ends the book, the man with the Bible over his face. And after that picture, in our edition, we run the end papers of the original, kind of signaling that you're coming out of that intact space. And we added a new chapter to the book called Black Ingenuity. This isn't in the book, but I'm showing you a little bit behind the scenes. There was a lot of new material that was returned to the family in 2017 from a safe deposit box in Sweden at SEB, which is a bank in Sweden. And in it were these folders where he collected both his negatives and his contact sheets. And so you can see, I've just pulled the ones from Black Ingenuity where he's named this. And you might not be able to read it, but that folder on the right, he'll often have a description, a short description of what the chapter is about. And it says Black Ingenuity, and then it says remnants of everything, of peace and harmony, of culture, of creativity, and of all the things they failed to stamp out. So Cole himself in this archive material gave us a guide for what this was about, even though we didn't always know what the individual material, individual images, they don't have captions. And then I'm just showing you some of the contact sheets that were in those folders. These were all, I just want to mention the PLP, the Photography Legacy Project, who's been scanning all these and digitizing these for the public in South Africa. So we had access to these, and you can see Cole's handwriting on these contact sheets where he's picked several of the images. So working with Leslie, who's on the line, and also James Sanders and Mark Sanders, who are consultants to the estate, we put together this chapter. And one thing that's super important to Cole, we think, is that he wasn't just showing Black artists performing. Here you see the musician composing. So there's a sense of agency in a lot of these. They're making the signs or directing. A lot of this is happening at Dorkay House. And this is the Battle of the Bands, and you can see it's for a Black audience. And so that was also important about who's consuming the culture that's being produced. At the same time, these are very well-known musicians. There's boxing. I'm just showing a little window into what this chapter on Black Ingenuity meant. And hopefully you'll see more of it when you get your own copy of the book. We ended the book on dancing. So we decided to end it here. And that really concludes the book tour.
Thank you, Denise. That's great. So, I mean, some of us are lucky enough to already have it in our hand. Don't forget, don't buy it without your Aperture PhotoBook Club discount, when somebody will put that in the chat. But maybe, Leslie, if you can hear us, maybe we'll begin with you and just say, what does this mean to you to have this book published in South Africa for the first time?
Having this book published for the first time in South Africa is a huge opportunity for us to keep the legacy alive of a complex man, very complex man, whose work is little known in especially in his own country, but a man who deserves, recognition as a major voice in the struggle against apartheid, and as an original photographic, artist, so it was really great, to have this book published for the first time in South Africa, I must say.
Well, we're honored to be a part of it, and we agree wholeheartedly. Maybe while your connection is good, I could ask you another question about the preface, about the lament. From what I understand, this was a voice that you felt was very important to include, and we agreed. If you would tell us from your perspective as Ernest Cole's nephew, as the representative of the foundation, what does Mangan Wale Sorote's words in this volume, which is one of the new parts that we've put into this new edition, can you describe a little bit about why that choice?
What we wanted was a South African to write, a preface or the lament, someone who knew clearly what informed Ernest Cole, photographs. Mongani Wale Sorote spent his lifetime expressing the injustices and harsh realities of life for Black people under apartheid. His work is inspired and continues to inspire, youth generations throughout South Africa, Africa, and the world. And his thoughtful, thought-provoking, poetry, not only, expressed the effects that oppression had on South Africans, but it also stands for a timeless, body of work that marks an important period in the South African history.
Thank you, Leslie.
I did pull a quote from him if we wanted to read it. I just really thought the way he spoke about the past and the present was powerful. And it says, why is oppression and abject exploitation of human beings by other human beings so persistent and relentless? House of Bondage poses this question once more to humanity. And so to have something like that open the book and really question, why did this happen? Why does it continue to happen?
Yep.
Why are we looking at it today? And what does it mean to us was kind of exactly what the book needed.
And maybe, Denise, I could ask you to build on that a little bit, because, while I think before we get into the design choices, that will you talk a little bit about the sort of philosophy of what we were determined to honor and keep unchanged, and the ways in which it felt necessary, why we changed the cover of the book, why we added the chapters that we did, and these voices that we did. Do you want to speak a little bit, to the challenge of taking such a historically important book and the responsibility associated with honoring that and making something that took advantage, or that acknowledged that we're speaking now, more than 50 years later?
Well, that definitely started with early conversations with Leslie and with James and Mark about, we had initially thought maybe we'll, on a lot of those contact sheets, there's other images marked. And so we thought, well, maybe we'll bring some of those into the chapters. And I think the more we went into it, we realized that was going to be extremely difficult. to do and still keep the House of Bondage itself intact. And so, Leslie, I don't know if you want to weigh in at all, but I think that's why in the end we decided, well, we could add this chapter that wasn't published and keep the entirety intact. And I think by the time we started talking with you, Oliver, I think we'd already made that decision. And so it was more just how do we present this? And that cover was not going to work for now. We did not want to reproduce that particular flag. We didn't want the, South African Black man exposes in his own pictures and words. That just doesn't work. So we knew, but we wanted to reference it. And so I think that was always our discussion. And Oliver, I don't know if you want to weigh in, or Leslie.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the cover was a difficult one in many respects. I think that I know that initially in thinking about the design, I was quite drawn to some of the images in Black ingenuity, and I think one of the first covers I presented had an image of the dancers on the front, and I chosen a typeface called Mercy Beat Mercy, which has this kind of pop 1960s undertone. It was drawn from a magazine that was published in Liverpool around the time of the early Beatles, and sort of upbeat, but with a sense of insurrection. And I thought that this was kind of in the spirit of where we were trying to take the book, but through the editorial process, Denise, as you say, and with you and Lana, and also when I got to read an early draft of Soroti's text, it really hit home for me that what the book was about, and the relevance of a re-release of this book for today. And this idea that despite all the hard-won freedoms, one could, in many respects, be looking at a contemporary document of South Africa. And when that hit home for me, I realized that it was actually, the book we were working on was in many respects a much darker book. And while there was a sense of wanting to celebrate what Soroti calls this sort of hard as diamonds human spirit, which is another beautiful phrase that comes out in this text, I think that there was a more sort of urgent job in the book. And so from there, once I was clear on that, using the original book more closely, almost forensically, became a kind of a cue for the design. And it was really a question of studying the old cover and understanding how it all fitted together, and studying the original typefaces and finding sort of updated versions of those. So a contemporary Garamond, still using 2 columns, but setting the text darker so that the book had the right sort of presence. So it was really a question of working with the original document very closely, and it's a great sense of responsibility to do justice to a book that has such a strong legacy, but at the same time to move it forward and think of how a book like this will exist for a contemporary audience.
Yeah, and I think this is an instance where, the way in which the content and the design really do exactly what you're saying. It acknowledges and honors what it was, while also grappling with the fact that there are things that have been, there are perspectives from today that we want to include in order to stress its ongoing importance, and to also bring in the missing chapter of Black ingenuity. Do we I don't know what, Denise, whether you or Oliver or Leslie want to speak a little bit more to that chapter, because every other chapter in the book was designed, it appears in this as it appeared in the original, but in this you had very fewer guideposts.
Yep. Leslie knows that was a real challenge to put this together, and we didn't include every single thing that he had marked. And so I think we had to make a call early on. Were we going to try to do exactly what we thought he wanted, or were we going to what exactly we were going to try to do? And it was extremely delicate. I do want to say that there's no evidence that this was cut by the publisher or forced out. This, from what we can tell, also in the archive are different lists in Cole's handwriting where you can see him working the order into things, and eventually Black ingenuity is not included. So there's every reason to believe it was his decision. So yeah, I don't know, Leslie, you were in the thick of it and actually helped make some of the more important calls about what went in and what stayed out. Like, what was your experience of it?
Yeah, look, I mean, we don't know why he excluded the chapter, you know, but we realized going through the folders in the archive that, you know, he prepared the chapter the same way that he prepared, you know, the other chapters in the book, you know, by, you know, marking, you know, the images on the contract sheets. It was a very difficult and long process for us to make a choice of which images should be included, you know, in the book. And of course, with the help of Mark and James, our dear friends in London, especially Mark, who had a very good eye, you know, to help us figure out what was Ernest Cole trying to capture, you know. Here and there, we couldn't figure out or see some of the things in the images, but at least he managed to see, you know, some of the things that we couldn't see. The images, in a way, started, you know, talking to us as if, you know, it's Ernest Cole talking to us, as Katia Bresson puts it, you know, to let my eyes speak for me, you know. So, and it was a very long and process, but yeah, we managed to, at least I believe, choose the best of the best in the chapter.
I would agree.
Oliver, do you want to add your perspective on this section and adding it sort of at the back after the end papers from the original edition are printed as pages? You want to sort of talk us through that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that as Leslie and Denise have already pointed out, the image selection was already there when, more or less, when I started working on the book. There was some give and take there, but the sequencing and the selection was very much done on their part. So from my side, and it was sort of back and forth with the editorial team, it was really just a question of picking up on the cues of the original book as far as the image grid is concerned. We tightened it up a little bit, but we emulated the design of the original book rather than trying to do something new. We thought that, of course, the typeface shifts into what are the two sort of contemporary sections of the book at the back and the front.
Will you actually explain that a little bit more clearly? Because I think it's a subtle detail, but it's an important and thoughtful one that I think you all did, just that nobody misses that.
I used the original book. I tried to establish what the typefaces were that we used, which was a Gothic for the display font and a Garamond for the body text, and I used those as the basis in which to make a decision for the new fonts that we used in the book, which are both contemporary typefaces designed by Fred Smyers. One is based the body text font is called Arnhem, and it's based on a Garamond. But it's slightly blacker, and again, like I said, contemporary. And the other, the display font has Gothic undertones, but it's this Mercy font that I really that has this kind of pop spirit to it, which I thought was a nice play on the sort of Gothic heaviness of the original display fonts. And
so
it's a
just
kind
to,
of-
just to be clear for anyone who's listening, it's like, so those fonts that you're describing only appear in the front and the back of the book. They sort of bookend the original.
in the contemporary sections, yeah. So they very much echo the original book, but they are sort of reworking of the original typefaces, if that makes sense. So the influence of the original book is very much there, but this is a kind of more contemporary version of that, if that makes sense. The images themselves, though, the grid was just an emulation of the grid of the original book.
We did try it out, and I know you did a concept of this, Oliver, where we looked at trying to do this chapter in more of a contemporary photo book layout, where the images are given more space, but they weren't chosen that way. You know, they were marked. Cole's marks were for a similar type of chapter, and so the edit didn't work in that way and felt funny at the end, but I think it was something we explored and then ended up coming back here. Of course, there's no captioning because he didn't write captions for these, or we never found any captions for them. So yeah, that was part of the consideration too. But sometimes it just kind of takes trying it and seeing like, oh, that doesn't work at all.
Yeah.
And Leslie, I don't even think we showed some of those to you because George.
Yes.
I am curious, Leslie, like what was your impression seeing the design for the first time when we first showed it?
No, I thought the design was amazing, you know. Yeah, you know, I was really impressed, you know. You could see that this book is you know, is a bomb. It's photography, all right. It's a real thing, you know, work of genuine quality. You know, this is Ernest Cole monument, a record against forgetting. Definitely, yeah, definitely. Yeah.
I love that, a record against forgetting.
Against forgetting. Yes.
Lovely, yeah.
We had
That's great to
actually
hear. Yeah.
we had actually looked at color on the cover, and it never worked out, and we talked about doing, you know, printing on cloth, and in the end trying to make it into an art object didn't make sense. It really was this kind of record against forgetting, and it needed to have a certain gravitas to carry that.
Yeah.
We went through many iterations of covers. It was also quite a process of trying to decide what image to use in the background once we'd established that the reworking of the typeface and the sort of letterpress setting or the reverse of that would work typographically. I think finding the right image was also a real challenge. And Denise, maybe you want to speak to this a bit more, but the image we chose was it's from the series, of course, and it's of a train, commuters sort of hanging onto the edge of a train, and it's one of the few sort of out of focus or blurred images in the book, or perhaps the only one, I don't remember. But I think the spirit of the image sort of speaks to this idea of the inability to contain. It sort of breaks through containment, even of the framing of, you know, the camera, but more importantly, the sort of the containment of that time in South Africa, and these commuters are sort of blasting through the frame.
Remy Anna Bonjo writes about this in her text.
Yeah.
I'll just see if I can quote a little bit from it. The dynamism of the photographic composition, akin to the book itself, is rooted in its fugitivity. In an act of documentary defiance, the blurred figures attest to the possibility of Black life that can't be contained by the strictures of apartheid. So this idea that even though they're clinging to the side of the train, they're looking forward, this sense there. And so it really felt like the right image to use behind House of Bondage. I don't know if you want to look at a few other covers we looked at, if that would be of interest.
That would be fun. Can we do that?
Do we have to?
Yeah.
Okay. Up to you, Oliver. Up to you, Oliver. I think it might be.
Is that something that you can queue, or should I share that?
Are you okay with that, Oliver, if we do that?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
No,
okay.
it's good to see the process. I don't have them. On
I
hand,
think maybe
so-
Clark has them. Maybe. We shall see.
I can also share a screen if that is not possible. So Just-
it's an interesting process, and we are grateful to you, Oliver, for letting us share it, because I think most
Yes.
people don't realize, there was a question early on of someone asking, why did you change anything about the original? And of course, when we both had new content that we wanted to bring into it in the beginning and the end, but also, it is a different moment. And so how do you sort of honor that original object while, but yes, there are a lot of, it's not necessarily easy. Okay. So maybe Oliver, you'll narrate us through.
Well, and these were a few we looked at, just different iterations of the same basic cover.
Yes. Yeah.
This is one I actually really liked a lot.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was one of the later images that we came across.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Hold on one second. Leslie's trying to say something. Leslie, do you have a comment on this version?
You were more against this one because it's from the newer chapter and it wasn't in the original book. And we weren't sure what it meant to have this woman, on the side in that pose, like what was its relationship to House of Bondage? And so we didn't go with this one. I know that was our behind the scenes conversation. So I don't know if that's what you're speaking to.
You want to scroll through a few others, and Oliver, you can tell us your thinking behind what you liked or didn't like.
Yeah, I mean, here we worked with the idea of using a contact sheet on the cover. Yeah, I think that it was a sort of, at this point we were really just working through options, and yeah, I was never that convinced by the contact sheets. I think they worked really well as end papers, but on the cover, it just sort of felt, I don't know, there was something of the impact of the images was lost for me. It felt a bit generic somehow.
It felt like a
we
movie.
needed to work through it and see it in order to understand that, of course. And yeah, we did this and many others. Yeah.
I agree. It works beautifully as the end paper, but I think it's interesting for people to get to see how many different options we actually consider before. Oh, let's pause on this one for
the
last image in the original.
We just couldn't put that over his face.
Yes. I mean, this image to me is very arresting, but it just didn't work as a cover image. With the typography, which I think by this stage we decided that was definitely right. So it was really more a question of finding the right image.
So then we really started fine-tuning this. We tried color, but it's not so legible. It might look actually okay on PDF, but when you print it, it's not good.
But good to mention that we used the Pantone black we used has a shade of blue in it, which is very subtle, but if it's there, and I think that the coolness of that, rather than the warmth of it, is very important, and I think comes through in the whole book in a way. It's not, there's a coolness, and I was very pleased with that, and it's a very subtle detail that for me, seeing the printed version, it's definitely present.
And do you feel that as like as a counterpoint to the warmth of the original? And I was always wondering if the warmth of the original to me feels, even the paper that it's printed on, if that's a factor of age or the process of, I think it is the photogravure, the original printing process.
Yeah. It's printed in Italy. It's on an uncoated paper. I think the warmth is from age. It's just, yellowed a bit over time. For this, I know there was a question in the chat about the production. We decided not to go with an uncoated paper because it just is very hard for the images to get those to print really, really well on an uncoated. So we went with a very, very toothy coated paper instead, to kind of mimic an uncoated, but to be able to give a different production value that wasn't quite as heavy and contrasty as the original, which was printed very well and was revolutionary at its time, but the printing process has changed now and allowed for a lot more mid-tone. So that was also a major choice that we made.
And actually, while we're comparing these two, there's a question about approach, maybe Oliver, you could answer this, about approaching the heft of the two editions. You know, so Denise is holding one version, I'm holding another. But could you talk about your thoughts to the physical weight or feel of the books, and you know, and your thinking about how to approximate those between the new and the old?
Yeah, I mean, I think heft in the sense of legacy, you know, that was certainly...
well, I think they may have meant physical, but you can feel free
Physical.
to address it either physically or philosophically.
It was both. I mean, the original book is quite a hefty book, I guess, physically. Yeah, that was never really an issue for me, to be honest. I never really picked up on that as something that I was working with or against, or I knew that our book would be a little bit more hefty because there's more material. Yeah, it wasn't something to work against so much. I mean, to me, the book doesn't feel too weighty as it is in terms of its sort of physical presence, although it has a very strong presence, which I think was definitely intended.
And I think leaving the black blank where that apartheid flag was, in terms of like a heft philosophically, like we wanted to feel that, you know, the stamp of that absence.
Yeah, signaling the absence. Yeah, I agree.
Absolutely, yeah, that was, I mean, almost an initial move. I mean, sort of the first step in the cover was like, we have to get rid of the flag, of course, in a way, and how do we represent its absence? And then this question of reversing out the letterpress, which I think a lot of people, when they see the cover, don't register that's what it is at first. When you see it's this letterpress blocks.
Yeah,
and it was quite an interesting interplay then of what would actually be printed if one were to print that letterpress plate. You know, what would you get? So that's kind of what we worked with the cover. Yeah.
I just
And
wanted
think
to note that Judy Mason just mentioned that her father, who was the original publisher of Ridge Press, always used a heavier paper stock than other publishers because it would show off the photography much better. And actually, some of the work that Remy did in research for her essay was in the Random House archive, and there's some correspondence there. And we discovered that they had wanted to reprint it in 1975, but ended up not doing that because we speculated that Jerry Mason had said, no, you can't move it to a United States printer, and wanted to keep it in Italy. So they didn't make a paperback version of it. I think that's what I'm trying to say. So it was one of the, you know, kind of smaller discoveries we made about some of, you know, the information about the original that we didn't know.
Denise, speaking of the discoveries, maybe we'll use this as a good segue to tease where you and where Aperture is going with Ernest Cole, because this is really just the beginning.
Yep, and it's actually the same team on this call working on it, that we're working on a body of work of Ernest Cole's United States work. And this was a body of work that was never really seen. And that was the real I won't say discovery, but what was really uncovered in the safe deposit boxes were about 50,000 negatives from the United States. So Leslie and crew and I have been going through those, and we're working on a design now with Oliver, and hopefully we'll have all that together soon. So we're putting that together for next year. And Leslie, I don't know, do you want to speak to, there's an exciting film possibility happening? I don't know if you yes.
Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes. The other project that is upcoming is that the trust has signed an option agreement with Raoul Peck of Velvet Film in Paris. He is working on the Ernest Cole Film project, and he's hoping that the film will be released by end of 2023. So they are working very hard. The researcher and the producer has been in South Africa, has been in Sweden, and is now back in London talking to various people that worked with Ernest Cole before. And he's also planning to go to the United States of America to talk to some few people. So yeah, we're looking forward. We're really looking forward to the Ernest Cole Film project.
Yeah, so are we. So that is, we may have to bring the band back together, Leslie, when with the hopes that you won't have another power outage, so we can see your face and hear your voice going forward.
Yes. I'm gonna work on that.
Don't worry, we know it's not your fault.
I'm going to plan to get lithium batteries, so I can have a better backup and fiber connection. That's my.
Well,
yes.
when we first talked this morning, I was suggesting you could just put candles around your table. So whatever options.
No, I have camping lights, so I've got 3 of them instead of candles. Yes,
well,
yeah.
we are very, very grateful to you for tuning in. So I just want to check and make sure. Yes, I will say we are going to, oh, that's right. So this has been so exciting. I almost forgot about what we wanted to conclude with, which is with Cole himself. It feels fitting to bring this conversation to a close with footage from a Swedish documentary that was produced by Rune Hasner that we're going to play here. So if you're tuning in to our post-event recording on YouTube, you can pause the video now and follow the link that we'll put in the description to view it. He was sure South Africa would be free. And yeah, that thank you to Denise and Leslie for suggesting that as a way of ending our gathering today. Speaking of thanks to Denise and Leslie and Oliver, thank you for joining me today for this final gathering of our first season of the Aperture PhotoBook Club. We're really grateful to Ingram for having sponsored us through this year, and to Clark and Candle Productions for all of their technical direction and production. We certainly couldn't do it without you. Season 2 is upon us. Our first gathering is going to be on Wednesday, February 1st. So stay tuned for more details. We have another new and exciting way to begin next season. And, to all of my colleagues at Aperture, to Brianna and Alex, who are on helping behind the scenes today, thank you for that. Happy holidays, enjoy time with family and friends, and don't forget, you can own this, give it as a gift, and use your Aperture PhotoBook Club discount, which you can also give to people, encouraging them to join the conversation next year. So thank you all for your enthusiasm, for your support. We really appreciate it. And we look forward to connecting with all of you in 2023. Thank you all.